Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, there's no other way to really slice to the hard reality and facts that grief and loss are a part of life, but there's still very complex things that need to be dealt with. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm assuming you do, you're listening right now, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcast. Give us that 5-star rating. And plus, we archive all of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would really appreciate it. Also, please don't hesitate to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please come pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, streaming, video on demand, film festivals. Basically, if it's the moving image and we're watching it and writing about it and talking about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, stop on by. On this episode, we've got a real interesting one. It's a new documentary which is going into the National Geographic section over on Disney Plus today. And it's called Torn, from filmmaker Max Lowe. And it is the story of his dad, Alex Lowe, who was a climber in his ill-fated climb, which ended up costing his life. And it's the story of his son sort of trying to get back to that spot. And I mean, Max really went through a journey because Alex was a towering figure in the world of outdoor sports. But when he was buried by an avalanche trying to ski the north face of the Himalayas, his life changed. And then 16 years after the deaths, their bodies were found. And Lowe's family goes to that spot and sort of gets a little bit of closure and sort of discovers, I guess, maybe the cathartic nature of grief. It's a real interesting watch because it reminds you that grief stays with you, and it's not something that you'll have some closure, but it's never going to be the kind of thing where it ever 100% goes away. And watching Max go through all this footage and see the footage of his dad is really a fascinating character study. And also, if you're a climbing fan, there's some real beautiful photography in here, and it's a fantastic doc, and yet another fantastic one that is being put on Disney Plus with our friends at National Geographic, and they've been doing some great stuff over there lately. So if you want a good documentary to check out, I would recommend going over to Disney Plus and click on that National Geographic button. It's going to be hard to go wrong, but especially with Torn, which is dropped on the service today. So check that film out, but check out our talk with Max because it's a real good one. Now, I mean, obviously, just first off, congratulations on the movie, man. Like, I absolutely loved it. I mean, you got me in all the sweet spots. I cried, but I love the story as well. I mean, other than the obvious question of, you know, why you wanted to tell the specific story, but I'm fascinated why you wanted to document it, because it seems like not just telling your dad's story, but also sort of coming to grips with it from a family at the same time. It felt very cathartic for you guys to sort of put this out in the open and sort of share it as you sort of made peace with how he passed away.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few points to that. One, and the main one probably being that our family story has always been in the public eye.
Right.
Ever since Alex first started into his career of mountaineering. Like, the story about the family he left behind was always kind of part of his story. And so for me and my brothers and my mom, we were always kind of part of that world. And, after his death, that just continued, and I think it was in, what year was that? Whenever Meru premiered at Sundance, a small portion of our family story was included in my stepdad Conrad's part in Meru. And watching that in the theater there and feeling the palpable emotional relief in the audience really hit me. I was like, well, this is just a tiny part of the complexity that I see in our family. And why haven't I told this story? And I don't think at that point I was like, well, I'm going to go make a feature documentary film and sit my parents and my brothers down and interrogate them. But that was really the moment where I saw the power within the story of grief.
For sure.
That Alex's death and the story of it represents. And I think, the second kind of major turning point for me was going back to Tibet. The scene at the end of the film. That was the first thing we shot. Me and my younger brother Sam. When Alex's body was discovered, a friend came to me and was like, "Hey, if you ever want to make a film about Alex, this has to be a part of that." And I asked my family if they would be okay filming it, and they agreed. We didn't know at that point what it would become, if it would become anything, but coming out of that experience and documenting that experience, for me personally, was just immensely impactful and allowed me to step back and see the complexity and the layers within each of our own experience, as we each related to Alex still 18 years after his death.
No, I mean, something I think I really loved about the film is that, and not to use a buzzword, but it almost feels a little meta in a way, because there's elements of the film that are basically you going through tape for the film. And I'm kind of curious because obviously as a documentary filmmaker, you don't necessarily want to put yourself in as the subject, but very much you and your family are the subjects. And I'm kind of curious, how were you in sort of focusing the lens on yourself, especially as you're going into this very much unknown territory of going through all this old footage of Alex?
Yeah. Well, I never intended to be in the film as much as I ended up being. As you say, I think as filmmakers, we find safety and comfort behind the lens for a reason. But as we continued on in making the film, it became quite apparent that my experience in uncovering all this stuff and my part in sitting down to talk with my family members about this whole thing, it wasn't going to be just a story about Alex. It was going to be a story about our family. And I'm part of that family, and I was the one who asked all my family members to sit down and be a part of this. So I was the driving force behind a lot of this action. And it became more a perspective that I wanted to paint of my own perspective. I was inspired by filmmakers and the likes of Sarah Polly, who made Stories We Tell, and my friend who made Minding the Gap, where part of their experience in making the film and being a part of that filmmaking, that's the perspective that you as an audience member get to sit in, which I'll like. Those are some of the most powerful documentaries that I've ever watched, and that was something that I wanted to harness in my presence in this film.
Well, I love that you mentioned those, because I think you did that and then some. It really comes through as such a powerful and personal story, and just really learning not just about Alex, but kind of learning about, so like you said, the grief process, but also sort of the idea behind the passion of climbing, and sort of these people who want to go on these expeditions and risk their lives and do this. And I'm kind of curious, what kind of insight did you get on Alex, and I guess maybe the sport in general of climbing and just sort of these expeditions that these guys do, who are willing to literally risk their lives and leave their family to achieve these amazing feats.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question that a lot of people ask of anyone in this world. Like, how could you go and do these things knowing you could die and leave behind the people you love? Um, and I didn't set out to nail anyone to the door. Like, I didn't want to point a finger at Alex and be like, he was wrong to leave our family behind, because I've never felt that way. I understood his love for this thing that made him whole just as much as our family did. Um, and I think that anyone who has a love for something that is for themselves and of themselves understands that. It doesn't have to be mountain climbing, it can be anything. um, this is an extreme example because you can die doing mountain climbing. But I mean, my hope was that you could see Alex struggling to find that balance in his life, and then we see the consequences of his choices, but then also you see the fact that we found love and we found purpose even in his absence.
For sure. Now, I mean, was it that love that maybe helped you find your own love to be a filmmaker? Because I mean, you see it in the film, not just obviously with some of the great photography and some of the locations you were at, but it's a very emotional film. And I mean, because you're telling the story about your family, it comes across in a very sort of intimate way, much more than would be expected if it was just some sort of random person talking to people about, a tragedy that happened in their lives.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I think growing up, looking up to Alex, having him as my hero, and my mom, who was my rock and held our family together, even as she pursued her own career as an artist, doing this thing that she loved. I don't think it was ever an option for me not to do something I loved as a career. um, and yeah, I mean, I still aspire to be like that. I still aspire to be there for the people who I see as being my base, the people who have gotten me to where I am in life, while also pursuing a love of something for myself. And that has become filmmaking in a large sense. And um, yeah, I mean, it's a never ending journey, and I wanted to imbue my my journey and my discoveries as I've had them within the experience of Torn.
What was there a movie sort of when you were younger that sort of set you on this path? Because I mean, obviously, especially when you're a kid, you're not necessarily watching documentaries, but I think anybody who grows up loving film and being a film fan will always have something that maybe sort of they saw and kind of sparked them along the way. Was there anything for you that was like a movie moment where the light bulb went off?
Well, I mean, I loved Star Wars. And just like the quintessential hero's journey therein was something I like resonated with. I had all the Star Wars toys when I was a kid, and I think that you know that that story is one that has been replicated over and over again in pop culture and in storytelling as a whole. But um, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's like one film that really like set me on the path of wanting to make films. Uh, Nothing's coming to mind right off the bat, but I mean, I've been lucky that uh, I've been exposed to so many amazing storytellers. I would say that I've been more inspired by the people around me. I was lucky to grow up in this world where there were remarkable storytellers, coming to our home, from the people who were shooting the films that you get to see in Torn, some of these archival films, climbing movies that were shot in the 80s and 90s. And his best friends were me on our prolific filmmakers, and best friends today are, I think, they got me.
Sorry about that. I think we had a technical glitch.
Oh, it happened.
But I mean, just to start putting a bow on this, I'm kind of curious as you're digging through all this footage and as you're sort of trying to sort of in your brain put a movie together, how were you able to sort of balance on one end this very sort of emotional and cathartic moment that you're going through, not just with yourself, but with your entire family, but balance it with sort of the filmmaker brain and kind of know when you had a feature, when you had a story that you could really work on? Like, where was there sort of a pivot moment sort of in the whole process that maybe sort of caught you off guard and went, okay, this is a feature, we can do this now?
Well, I mean, I think that coming out of Tibet and realizing the power of that, what we experienced there and what we captured there, I shared about that experience at the summit in Montana where I live. I spoke to an audience of 100 people, 100 strangers, some of them friends, but I went up there and talked about my takeaways from Tibet, my emotional fears, and kind of broke down. And walking off that stage and having all these people come up to me and have this very powerful reaction to my sharing that story made me really believe that it could be something bigger than what I maybe had ever imagined it might be. And I think it was really in realizing the palpable emotional power within being vulnerable in this way that really inspired me to see this as a feature doc. You know, I didn't know how it would become that at that juncture, but I knew that we had this immense trove of archive that I had never touched. I knew that there was conversations that I wanted to have with my family and people who knew Alex and have known our family through the last 20 years of our lives since Alex's death. And I didn't know how I would find my way through it, but I was dedicated to try.
Well, and I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing that you did because, I mean, it just in watching this film, it just reminded me of the fact that, I mean, when people are on the outside looking in, they expect the grief process to be this sort of tangible sort of thing that you go through and sort of work through and then understand and then it's done. But the reality is it has so many moving parts and it is absolutely so complex on so many levels. And I mean, I think your film really brought that to light in a beautiful and fantastic way. And I just want to say thank you for the work and thank you for the time today, man.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope that as the film makes its way into the world, I have been able to share in so many other people's experiences of grief. They have seen the film and reached out to me to tell me about something that it, allowed them to access for themselves. And coming out of the last 2 years, especially, I think a lot of people are experiencing grief in different ways. So
Sure.
I think it's a conversation that hopefully I can be a small part in inspiring for people. So,
It's one that needs to be had. And I definitely think you've kicked it off in the right direction, man. Congratulations again on the work and thank you for the time.
yeah, thank you so much.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.